All right, five. This is my favorite step. They're all my favorite. What can I say? I like them. They make me happy. So, Pennsylvania. Where are you from, Pennsylvania?
York County.
York County. That's where the barbells were invented. Did you know that? York, PA. Where they invent. I don't know. I know random shit. What can I say? All right. So let's talk about step 5. Step 5 is it's kind of a thin slice of reality. What? What did I do? Oh, hi! So it's interesting that we should be on the 10th tradition because I like to take the 10th tradition the way mafiosos take the 5th Amendment. Right? I have no opinion on outside issues, and I'm not going to incriminate myself with it. So we're just going to leave it at that, which is not true. I actually have opinion on outside issues, but I don't share them. Okay, that's not really true either. I have opinion on outside issues, and I should probably share them less. That's probably true. All right, so let's talk about this step. I want to talk about the 12 and 12 first, and then we'll get into the book on page 75. But let's start with an anecdote, because it's, like I said, there's not a ton written, but there's some good information. First of all, I want to lead you with a question. The step says, what? Admit it to God, to ourselves, and to another human being, the exact nature of our wrongs. What I want you to ponder while I tell my asinine anecdote is, what is the exact nature of the things that I have done wrong? Just let that marinate like a nice resentment, you know? Because that's what resentments are. They're marinations. And remember, we talked about that last week when we talked about the 4th step, restescentia, to rethink, to refill. Listen, I like my meat marinated because it intensifies the flavor. That's why we like to marinate on our resentments, because it intensifies the flavor, right? And when that's intense, I now am empowered to do whatever I please, because I have achieved ultimate victim status as being the brunt of the universal conspiracy. Give me a couple of those. So, I forgot what I was saying. I get lost a lot, just so you know. Anecdote. Okay, so let me tell you about the first time I ever did a 5th step. So, I got sober in LA, and it was the first time I got sober, and I had this sponsor. His name was Richard T. Bear. Amazing guy, super nice. Horrible sponsor. Just lovely man, just shit sponsor. So he had a lot of time. He was a smart guy. Was really happy and jocular and all that good stuff. Didn't give me any direction on the 4th step. None. Just said, just write. I'm like, So I had one of those like spiral notebooks that had everything, like stuff that like there's no statute of limitations on, and weird sexual stuffs and picadillos, and I don't know. I remember I wrote down, like, when I was 7, I built my first gun and actually killed a goose in Golden Gate Park by the guys doing Tai Chi at Spreckles Lake. Like, shot a marble. I was horrible. I went home and I stayed in bed for like 3 days. I kept reading the paper. I thought there was going to be a cover story about the goose murderer of Golden Gate Park. So I wrote this entire, just like a book of my shit, like literally. And so I got this spiral, and I go over to Richard's house, and I picked him because he was like sort of famous. He was the keyboardist for like Crosby, Stills and Nash, which is odd because I kind of hate hippies, just generally speaking, on principle, not in terms of resentments. It's a spiritual conviction, and I'm sticking with that approach, and do you guys know why I have problems with hippies? Would you like me to explain it? You know?
Because you're a punk?
Maybe on the surface. This is why. Because hippies claim peace, love, unity, and respect. Dude, it's all about plur. Right? They claim to live the way I have to as a recovered human being. Because if I don't live by peace, love, unity, and respect, I die a miserable death in a cave in my cups like every other alcoholic on the planet. So, they are fronters. That's why I don't like them. Just saying that, and I grew up in San Francisco, and that smells like patchouli and communism and all kinds of weird things going on at the same time. So I go over to Richard's house to do my 5th step, and And he goes, okay, let's go in the studio. So we go and sit in the studio, and I'm freaking out, right? I'm freaking out. I had never told anybody my deepest, darkest dirt. And there's stuff in there that was, I don't know, in my mind, it was the most horrible thing. I thought I was evil. I really thought I was an evil person. And when I was using and drinking for years, I literally, especially when I got out of the Army, I really believed that I only knew how to do one thing really well, and it was somewhat nefarious and not a marketable skill to normal people, right? And that kept me in this cycle of shame, that I was inherently a bad person. And what I did was I actually exerted effort to convince myself that I was a sociopath, because I couldn't continue to behave that way unless I sublimated and buried the guilt and shame that I had and told myself that I had no feelings, right? It's the only way I could have done it. And while this is all true and I thought I was a tough, hard guy, I'd be on my couch at 11:30 at night, shit-faced, and that SPCA commercial would come on with Sarah McLachlan saying, like, ah! And I would like die for the remote because I'd start crying like a 3-year-old, like, ah! Wailing, like, oh, I'm so tough, yeah, whatever. He's like one puppy with his eyeball hanging, it's over for me. So I go and I pick up the thing and I'm reading it, and I got my face in the book, literally. I'm not looking at him. I'm like, and I'm reading, and it starts off, he's like, oh yeah. Yeah, and I can just feel his judgment like coming through the spiral notebook, and I'm like, so I just keep reading. He's like, Second 20 minutes, it calms down. He's all, Third 20 minutes, it's all, The last 20 minutes, no sounds. None. And I can't look at him. I'm freaking out. I'm like, what is... He's probably calling the police right now. I finally get done reading. I don't say anything. And he doesn't say anything. And I'm not looking at him because I'm afraid. I go, okay, I got to look. I got to look. Just look. Before I just look, I put down my spiral notebook, and he's asleep. And he's asleep. And so I roll it up and I wing it at him in his easy chair, max him in the side. He's like, wood! And I'm like, dude, you asshole. I just read you my 5th step. And he's like, okay. And I'm like, aren't you supposed to give me feedback? And he goes, the book says you have to read it to me. It doesn't say I got to listen to it. I'm like, wow, that's super helpful. I said, I really wanted some feedback. And I shit you not, this is what he says to me. He goes, were there any barnyard animals? And I'm like, no. He goes, you're fine. That was my first 5th step, right? So what I missed in that 5th step was the exact nature of what was wrong with my wrong. Because what I learned in recovery is that I do not ask the question why anymore. I ask the question why my entire life. Why am I an alcoholic? Why does everything go bad? Why did my mother that carried me for 9 months throw me away? Why can't I get a job? Why does everything I start fail? Why do I feel uncomfortable even around the people that I know that are my friends? Why do I feel like I'm outside the circle even when I'm in it? Why am I in a room of people and feel inherently alone? Why? And I never got those answers because it's a circular argument. It's like being 5. Mom, why is the sky blue? Well, because the water's blue. And why is the water blue? Well, because the sky's blue. And it just goes on and on and on. I never got an answer, and that's what made me even crazier, right? I got sober, and my sponsor told me, my new sponsor. But, oh, by the way, I immediately fired T-Bear. Like, immediately. Like, thanks for sharing. Fuck off. Like, that was it. I was gone. And I found a new sponsor. And then, of course, I'm like the angel of death with sponsors. Like, I don't know what happens, but like their wives get ill, and there's deaths in the family, and they have to move away. I think that it's probably me. And so my sponsor, I did work with him, and I was on my second pass through the steps, and his wife got ill, and he moved to Seattle. And he took me and introduced me to his sponsor, and that's how I got my sponsor that I had for 10 years ago. It was forced upon me. And that was my first legitimate sponsor. And he's the one that told me originally that I will always be your sponsor, which, by the way, was a lie, because he's not my sponsor anymore. A little bastard. But he did say that, and I actually kept him when I moved from California to Pennsylvania. But I kept calling him, and he kept going, get a new sponsor. I'm like, but you told me you'd always be my sponsor. Don't you know I have abandonment issues? He's like, just get a new sponsor. Stop whining. So eventually I did get a new sponsor. But he told me that he wanted me to go through the steps with a different person formally about every year. And in essence, I have. I've been through the steps with 14 different people in the last 18 years. And it has expanded my horizons and understanding and consciousness of the steps. And what I always learned initially from all of them was that when you ask questions why, as an alcoholic who just has an organic existential crisis, you work yourself up into a state of hyper-catastrophization, where everything becomes horribly problematic and you end up drinking. In fact, why is the fifth step so important, even though it's very slim in the writing department? Well, because if you don't take one, you're going to drink one. That's a guarantee, okay? That's a guarantee. Because you have to come to terms with understanding the exact nature of your wrong. And the exact nature is the only time in Alcoholics Anonymous where we are allowed to ask why. The other questions, we strike why from our vocabulary when we do all the other steps, and we ask questions that don't have answers or don't have the need for answers, but have solution. We ask what, where, when, and how. What do I do? Where do I do it? When do I do it? How do I do it? And we have the results of those behaviors. The only time that I'm allowed to ask why is when I do my fifth step, because the exact nature of my wrong is not what I've done. It's why I did it, which started to be revealed in the pathology of fear from the fourth step, and why I still continue to do it, even in recovery, to my own peril. That's the most important thing. To my own peril. Now, we were just talking about this before. I asked Wally an awesome question. He gave me a great answer. He goes, that's 43 years. You should know. I'm like, oh. I'm unworthy, right? But we were talking, and it's interesting because I go to a lot of step meetings because I love step meetings because I love the steps. I go to literature meetings a lot. Like my home group, it's every day of the week. I don't really go every day. I go every day that there's literature, more or less. My sponsor will probably rat me out and say I don't go on Mondays, but it's daily reflections, and I have certain issues with that book, just saying. And if they replaced it with As Bill Sees It, I would do it, even though As Bill Sees It is a misnomer because it was renamed after Bill died in homage to him. The original name of that book was The AA Way of Life. Right, because it's a accumulation of writings, not from Bill, even though Bill probably saw it that way after he plagiarized it. Just saying. But, you know, we all do that because I plagiarized everything in my entire life. I shared this last week. The difference between me now and me getting loaded is I don't steal from stupid people anymore. I just steal from smart people. That's it. That is the entire alteration of my recovery, is stop stealing from stupid people and start stealing from smart ones. It's kind of simple, and it worked pretty well. So let's talk a little bit about the 12-12, because there's some amazing things. And that's the key about the fifth step. Oh, so what we were talking about, see, I get sidetracked. What we were talking about is whenever you go to a step meeting and it's on the fifth step, people always tend to talk about the fourth step or the sixth step, even though it's a fifth step meeting. And the reason is because fifth step's a little thin. Does anybody know what page it is on in the big book? Anyone? Are you looking it up, really?
It's already here. I don't have to look at it.
What page is it? 70 what? 70 who? 2. Really? 72? You sure?
I guess not anymore.
Yeah. 75, halfway down the page, right? What does it say? Would you like me to say it? Jeez, do I have to keep up, for Pete's sakes? All right, let's go to the 12 and 12 first, while he's trying to figure out where the 12th step, 5th step is. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff about who you should share with. That's not what the step's about. This is what the step's about. Let's look in the 12 and 12, right? So, It says, in fact, on page 55, scarcely any step, and this is in the 12 and 12, is more necessary, any step, for long-time sobriety than the fifth step. Scarcely any step is more necessary. Which is big words, considering 6 and 7 are a lifetime endeavor. Right? I don't want to talk about 6, but it does separate the men from the boys. Kind of like pubic hair. Did I say that? I was thinking it. I didn't mean to say it. Somebody once said that to me. I thought it was funny. But what we have to understand is this is huge. This step is huge. To understand the nature of my wrongs, exactly what I did and why I did it and why I continue to do it, is the thing that's going to keep me from doing it again. I cannot be in the 6th step until I understand the bentness, right, of my ability to do things and rationalize them away, the exact nature. It goes on to say that it has, once we have revealed in stark relief, right, those experiences we would rather not remember, if we come to know how our wrong thinking and action has hurt us and others, we need to quit living by ourselves with those tormenting ghosts of yesterday. This gets more urgent than ever. I can no longer torture myself or punish myself. I have to understand the nature of my wrong. Why did I do it, right? And what we're talking about is this idea of continuing to engage in self-induced post-traumatic stress disorder. If I allow myself to wallow in the misery, I end up being a 13-year-old goth chick with black lipstick who sits on the back steps of the house crying that Marilyn Manson isn't touring, beating myself in the chest and going, "Oh, sweet embrace of the Reaper, take me off this mortal coil." Because that's all I deserve. Because if I marinate in my self-loathing, I will die. I will absolutely die because I allow myself to have the trauma of that experience. Remember, the resentment is when I'm angered at somebody else and I relive that. And in essence, what I do is I allow someone who hurt me to re-hurt me by my own hand over and over and over again by living in that resentment. However, if I allow myself to live in the shame of my actions, I relive my post-trauma over and over and over and over again. Right? And there's real neurology to that, because my pain and my anguish is stored in my amygdala, which is where most of the trauma that I experience have. It is right next to the prefrontal cortex, and when I have a trigger that reminds me of me being shame-based, it bleeds through and I feel like it's happening all over again. Right? And I can't live with those tormenting ghosts. And that's exactly what it says, right? In the best case scenario of our lives, that we have to really look at what we're talking about. Because the best case scenario is that we can understand the nature of this wrong, and in doing so, we can find it objectionable, which is the doorway to the step 6. Right? That's the doorway. There's one line in the big book, and we'll talk about it next week because it's a crazy important line. We move on to page 57, right? And we look at the bottom of the page on 57, and it says, "Until we have talked with complete candor, total honesty about the nature and my feelings and my shame and my whys of behavior, of our conflicts, and then have listened to someone else do the same, we still didn't belong." This is interesting. This is the first time in any conference-approved literature that Bill indicates that in order to be a member in good standing of this society and be fully invested, not only do you have to go through the steps, but you have to take someone else through them. I mean, he hints at it in the big book in the very first line in Working with Others, right? Practical experience shows that nothing so much ensures immunity against the first drink than intensive work with another alcoholic. But I don't belong to this society, which is what I've always wanted. My entire shame is always that I have never belonged. And all my behaviors and bad angers and all my obstreperous everything that I did was just to try and belong, and then when I got accepted, I felt that I didn't, because I didn't feel good enough. And that's what was revealed in my 4-step, right? My biggest fear. Remember, we talked about that pathology last week, right? I'm not good enough, which means I'm afraid I'm unlovable, which means I'm afraid that I'm going to be alone, which means afraid I'm going to have emotional turmoil, which means I'm afraid I'm going to drink, because that's what I do for emotional turmoil. And when I drink, I'm afraid I'm going to die. And I'm afraid of death because I'm afraid of the unknown. And I'm afraid of the unknown because I don't believe in God. And if there is no God, I must be self-reliant, and self-reliance always fails me. Page 68. We write our fears down even though we have no resentments in connection with them. We ask, why do we have these fears? Because self-reliance fails me. I have no partner. That's all I've always wanted. So I become a member of this society when I then hear someone else, and I assuage their shame by saying, were there any barnyard animals? We look on page 58, which is another really profound idea. It says, the great dividend that we may expect from confiding in another human being is humility. And what is humility? I always have a problem when people talk about humility, even myself, even though I am probably one of the most humble guys you'll ever meet. And a spiritual giant to boot. The problem with humility is the minute you start talking about it, you've lost it. It's just the way it is. It's like a catch-22. It's like what made drugs illegal in the United States in 1914, the Harris Tax Stamp Act. Well, you can have the heroin if you have the stamp, but you can't have the stamp unless you have the heroin. Oh, you're done. Sorry. No longer. Can't get it in the Sears catalog anymore. Sorry. Changed my life for somebody's in 1914, that's for sure. But that's the catch-22, right? Humility, when you talk about it, you almost lose it. One of the best descriptions I've ever heard, and again, I have never had a new idea in my life. I'm going to totally steal something I heard in a meeting, who knows when, 1,000 times. Humility is what? It is not thinking less of yourself. It is thinking of yourself less. Where my self-absorption slips away, right? Remember the 9th step promises, right? We will lose interest in selfish things and gain interest in our fellows. And when that happens, my self-seeking slips away, just disappears without me knowing. My favorite promises are the 10-step promises. I strive to be placed in a position of neutrality, safe and protected. And being in the 5th step is the thing that gets me on that path. Because without 6 and 7, there is no 8 and 9. And without 9, there is no self-forgiveness. And I cannot be placed in a position of neutrality because I cannot be sane again. Bottom of page 84. We have ceased fighting anyone and anything, even alcohol, for by this time sanity will have returned. Do you understand? It's back. Wear it, right? We could not wish or will those traumas away. Now we recognize the defects that were still there, right? And though we recognize them, something had to be done about them, and we could not wish or will them away, right? He gives us a hint into the step 6. The idea of readiness and entirely readiness. We jump to the top of the next page on 55. Much trouble of self-delusion that has been causing us is the first difficulty of step 6. What is the difficulty? That I have self-delusion. Which means, how can I be certain that I made a true accounting and really understand the nature of my wrong unless I share it with somebody and they tell me, yeah, dude, you're seriously broken. Because it's like that line on page 31 in the book. It says, we do not like to label anybody alcoholics. It doesn't say we don't. Listen, everybody in this room labels people alcoholic all day long. Let's admit it. We do that all day long, right? We just don't like to label them alcoholic. Why? Because we're Pollyanna, and we're like, glass is half full, yay, let's all be happy and butterflies and shit. We want everybody to do that, right? But the truth is part of my disease tells me I don't have my disease. So how can I self-diagnose if I'm already broken and delusional? I can't. I need someone else to tell me I'm alcoholic. The same way I need someone else to look at my failings in an honest manner and say, yeah, I've had those feelings. I've done those things. You are not broken beyond repair. This is the point where we start to understand the difference between a defect and a shortcoming. It becomes realized in step 6. For me, it was intense to understand that difference. And I'm going to cuss now. I hope I don't offend anybody. If I do, tell your sponsor. But this is how he explained it to me. A defect is a fuck you. And a shortcoming is a fuck up. And that's the difference. Right? Right? When I'm aware and I choose to do the wrong thing, I live in defects. But we'll get to that next week. I'll try to swear again just to make you happy. So he goes on, so this is what I need to do. One of the problems is I think that I can do an honest self-evaluation, but how would I know it's honest unless I got somebody to tell me? I can't. Here's something I learned from my wife. And I picked it up and I started using it with my sponsees. And Charlie's not in his 5th step yet, but he's about to be if he ever gets through his goddamn 4-step lazy sack of shit. Oh, hi, Charlie. But I'm it's like a what are those things called? Spoiler. I'm gonna give Charlie a spoiler. What I do when I have my guys do a 5th step, I do 2 things. The first thing I do is I make them put their big book on the highest shelf in their house. Highest shelf in their house. And then come to my house. But before they do that, I have them sit at the end of their bed and read their entire 4-step out loud to God. Because it says we admitted to God and to ourselves. And most people think that you get a 3-fer when you read it to your sponsor. You kill all 3 birds with 1 stone. That's not how it works. You got to read it to God first. Because then God can cast aspersions on you as he expresses himself in your own conscience, and you've already broken that initial piece of shame. What is the shame that we bear for so many years? It's the power of the secret. The power of the secret. That killed me forever, the power of the secret. It's like I was walking around with a 50-pound, you remember those balloons that were punching bags, those thick balloons, like hippies at festivals fill them with nitrous and stuff. It's commies, but the punching bags, those thick ones. It's like I had that on my head, full of shit, and I just was weighing on my head, 50 pounds, just smashing my head, and just carrying it around. And I tried to wash it off and shower, and listen, it never went away. Because that meniscus, that rubber, was the secret that held all that shit in my head. What did I have to do? I have to reach up and pop it. And what happens, the first thing that happens when you pop a bubble of shit that's on your head? You get covered in shit, granted. But now when you shower, you can wash it off and you no longer have to carry it. Right? If I shatter the secret, I lose the shame. And what I feel to be the worst thing is just part of being human. That's what comes to the reality. We go down and we look at the second difficulty. And what is the second difficulty with doing a fifth step on page 60? It says in the 12 and 12, the second difficulty, what comes to us alone may be garbled by our own rationalization and wishful thinking. Everybody in this room, I hope, I know for me for sure, I have the magical magnifying mind. Listen, there's some weird people live in my head. Strange ones. Weird. Interesting. But not my friend. And the majority of them talk to me a lot. And they all sound like God. Oddly enough, even though they have varied accents. Don't know why. I'm just telling you. Oh, so I wanted Charlie to tell a joke, but I forgot to get him up here to do it, so I'm going to do the joke for you because I figured we should do a joke in the middle of this just because it's a joke. So, why do alcoholics have small hands? Why? We pause when agitated. It's horrible, right? You're laughing now. See, I can see you laughing. That was funny, right? It was kind of funny. All right. So I have this crazy mind, right? The benefit of talking to another person is that I can get their direct comment and counsel on the situation, and there can be no doubt in my mind what that advice is, as opposed to the people who live in my head and give me advice that's not the best advice to start with. This is what you got to understand. My brain broke my brain, and my broken brain cannot unbreak the brain it broke in the first place without somebody else's unbroken brain to help me unbreak mine. And if you understood that, you're sober. AF. Page 61. The real test of the situation are our own willingness to confide with full confidence in one who you share your first accurate self-survey. Stop worrying about who you read it to. Stop being a baby. Trust me, I was so scared when I was sitting in T-Bear's studio. I thought the world was going to come to an end. And the one thing he did tell me was, it's not a big deal, right? Listen, you want to put my 4-step on Facebook? Feel free. I don't care. I've done some horrific things, but there's no shame in my game because my goal is to rectify my karmic wheel, to live as a decent human being, to pay it forward, right? Third tradition. What is the goal? What is our common drive, right? What binds us? It's not whether you talk about drugs in a meeting or not. That's not what the third tradition is about. Third tradition is about what is our purpose now, not what it was before. We're here to get well, to get healed, and to heal each other. Primary premise of unity, the number one tradition. I sacrifice my petty, childish desires and emotions to benefit the group, which in turn heals me in the long run. It's awesome, man. It's awesome, right? I'm telling you, Jesus was living up inside Bill when he wrote that, for sure. Maybe I'm not in a weird way, but you know what I mean, right? All right, so the very last page, 62, this feeling of being one with God and man, this emerging from isolation through the open and honest sharing of our terrible burden of guilt and shame, I would say, brings us to a resting place where we may prepare ourselves for the following steps and full and meaningful sobriety. Full and meaningful sobriety, right? This is the thing. I always felt that I didn't belong. And when I did a 5th step, I started to feel like I did. And let me tell you that you never, ever have to be alone again. Not once, not ever. Right? So let's look in the big book, right? So on page 75, in the big book, it says, our fears fall from us. Remember last week we talked about the 3rd column specifically as the one that examples my pathology of fear. Every problem I've ever had in my life, sober or drunk, comes from overreacting to a fear. The fear that is in my head has a net value of 0. It's a fantasy. The actions that I do to compensate for it have a value because they occur in the real world, which means that everything I do for that fantasy defect is an overcompensation. And I don't know about you guys, but not once in my entire life has an overcompensation worked for me. Not once ever. It's always backfired. Every single time. I have a fear that creates a delusion, a lie about how I think the world works. It gives me a bad attitude. That bad attitude leads to shitty actions. Those actions backfire. And the thing that I was afraid of comes true by my actions. But when I start to share that pathology that was revealed in step 4 with another person, and they share that feeling of shame and guilt, and they say, understand, you do not have to let fear drive you. That false evidence that appears real is not real. And if you remind yourself of the asinine nature of those fantasies, you never have to be driven by them again. And that's what it says right on 75. That my fears fall from us. Right? We see the ridiculousness. And we don't have to play that game anymore. Right? We have a nearness to our Creator, it says in the book. Right? I start to realize that I am a child of God. And if I did a second step, in a way where one of the things I do in the second step, I don't know if we talked about it, I don't know if I mentioned it, but what I do is I have my guys write a want ad for God, like a Craigslist ad. Not a sexual one or nothing, but not like a back page ad, but recovered alcoholic seeks higher power that's like forgiving and loving and, all that kind of great stuff. Humorous, yeah. I don't want to embarrass Charlie, but this grown man was crying in my living room when he was reading this to me, because what we do is the things that we project on our higher power are actually the opposite of who we've become in our alcoholism, right? If I want my God to be loving and forgiving and kind and humorous, what's the opposite? I'm full of fear. I'm vindictive. I'm vitriolic. I'm dark and depressed. I'm selfish and self-centered. My defects are actually the opposite of what I project on God. And why is that? Because it's not really a list of what I want in God. It's a list of what I want in myself. And the reason it's a list of what I want in myself because it's what I've always had, but my alcoholism has prevented me from living in it. So I get a glimpse into my authentic self. A glimpse, right? So what happens? Those things, those traits that I project on my HP are really my genetic spiritual predisposition from the Big Father. And I start to feel that to be true when I do a fifth step, because I see myself as eminently human. I am a human being and a child of God who has done bad things. I am not a shame-based, degenerate, alcoholic scumbag. I am not a POS anymore. I'm a child of God who's done some bad things. But now that I know that, and I don't want to be that guy, I'm obligated to try and fix those, which opens the door for 6 and 7, which allows me to grow into that thing. And I'll mention this next week when we talk about it. I don't want to give it all away, because 6 is awesome. Mm-hmm. On page 567 in the Big Book, on Appendix 2, it gives an amazing definition of the spiritual experience, right? It's the second one. It's in the middle of paragraph 4, and it's right. The first sentence says, friends of the newcomer are aware of the change long before he is himself. And then it gives us the definition. This definition is amazing because it's got a scorecard for recognizing your growth and being a child of God. And it says, he finally realizes that he has undergone a profound alteration in his reaction to life, and that such a change could hardly be brought about by himself alone. That means I notice that I'm a different cat, and I react differently. And I notice that those reactions are different, not because of anything I did, but because I start to live and hang around people who I admire, who are trying to be children of God as well. Right? That's the newcomer guy that's been blowing my phone up, called right before. It's okay, I'll talk to him later. He won't die. He's just super needy. I totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh yeah. Appendix 2, right? So that's the thing. So, I realize. What do I realize? That I react profoundly different to life, right? Funny thing. So I go to EDI. This was maybe 3 months ago, maybe 4. I was smoking at that time, and I'm out in front of the meeting, and it's like in the corner of a strip mall. And I was there Saturday morning, and I don't know what possessed whatever halfway house to bring their druggy buggy full of lunatics to a 7 o'clock morning meeting, but I was smoking on Saturday morning, and this, I don't even know how to say this nice, Del Rey fuckboy, maybe that's the proper thing, because they got a flat brim hat, gold chains, a vape, like, brand new sleeve. He comes falling out of the van, and he body checks me in the back, and he goes, "Get out of the way, bitch!" Right? And I'm like, okay, 20 years ago I would have turned around and headbutted this guy, and when he was passed out, I literally would have urinated on him in front of his friends. Just a little salt in the wound, right? But what happened? My first thought is, I am so glad I'm not you. Dude, I feel so bad for you, dude. Because I know you're pissed because you're in a halfway, you're in IOP or something, and you're at a 7 o'clock meeting on Saturday. That means somebody did some bad shit at your facility, and you're getting punished. Dude, I am so sorry, and I am so glad I'm not you. My first instinct was not to murder his face. It was to go, wow, I feel bad for that cat. And understand that never came to me on my own. It came because I associate with men of dignity and integrity that I admire and want to be like. That's the deal. I didn't learn that shit myself. Somebody taught it to me. That's a profound, massive, huge, monolithic alteration in my default setting, which is to sock a dude in the throat. I kind of went with the headbutt. It was my favorite move. Just a no neck. This is my imitation of a snapping turtle. Just saying. So that's like my default setting, right? But my default setting is inherently changed, right? Like 30 years of doing things one way, and now it's not my default setting anymore, right? Because I've had a profound alteration, and that didn't happen in a vacuum. And that's really what starts to occur when I'm in step 5. I understand that I have the potential to be my authentic self, which is a reflection of my projections on divinity, and that occurs by associating with people that are willing to look at me in a loving way, regardless of what I've done, because they understand how hard it is for me just not to do bad things. See, we can't go out in the world and expect people to, oh, attaboy, you didn't murder anybody today. You stole. You didn't steal all my money. You're awesome. Nobody gives a shit. They're too self-absorbed with their own crap. That's why we come here. We come here so that the rest of you broken weirdos can go, dude, you're awesome. You didn't kill anybody. Sick. All right, like, that's awesome, dude, because I need that. Because only you people understand me and how hard it is for me just not to do bad things. The rest of the world doesn't understand that. That's why when I share those bad things with somebody, it frees me in a way that no other way will. All right? 75. Again, in the big book. A broad highway opens up to us. This is the flow of the universe. Why do alcoholics and addicts die? Because they try to take off-ramps where they don't exist. They use their perceived perception of reality that they believe they can change the fixed laws. And understand this, the universe, divinity, God, whatever you want to call it, operates on a systemic principle, systems dynamic law. That means when I operate within the parameters of the system, I can grow, I can survive, and I can flourish. Trust me, it's like being on a 1,000-lane highway. I can choose any lane I want. I just can't drive off the elevated freeway when there's no off-ramp, because that's when I die. And that's what happens. Alcoholics either can't or won't find a way to conform within the system. And in doing so, the system eventually course corrects them out of the equation. And as harsh as that is, I don't want to be that guy anymore. I don't want to risk that. I get put on that broad highway. I still get to choose every lane I have, every lane I want. There's always been this theological argument, right? The idea of the conflict between God knowing everything and man having free will. There's no conflict. I can't conceive of the idea of absolute knowledge of every possibility in the universe, right? It's beyond me. That's why it's left to divinity. God doesn't know what I'm going to do. He knows the possibility of anything I may, which still allows me to make the choice. Do you understand? And that's the beauty of this whole thing. And I start to see that as the relationship between a child and a parent. Have we done the work well? What does it say on 75 right when we're getting down to business? Coming home, we rest for an hour. Taking this book down from the shelf, which is why I make them put it up there in the first place, because they take it down, they go, holy smokes, I just did that. It's awesome, dude. I'm telling you, put it up on the shelf, take it down. I take down the book, read page 75. Taking down this book, how did he know? Because I've read the page before, you idiot. That's how I know. It says it right there. Taking this book down from the shelf, we ask, have we done the first 5 proposals correct? Have we made mortar without sand? Because we are building an arch through which we will walk free men and free women. God bless you all. You're awesome.
so
Oh,
much,
you're
Mark.
welcome.
Thank
Cuts too
you.
much.
Thank you.
I'll try not to.
So the